Ronen Hartvey, together with my friend 𝐾𝐫𝐚𝐠𝐲 Grandmaster. How are you, Timo?
Hello.
And before, let me a little bit introduce Timo, who just made it to the top 100 in the world, and congratulations on that. The winner of Chicago Open 2011, the National Open 2010, the first one to do it in 26 years or alone or something like that. So definitely is the stronger of that side, but I will do my best to keep you entertained and look at the lines together with Timmy.
So, hello guys, Ronen Hartvey is going to be our host and the one who's going to guide the interaction. He is an experienced coach. He became world champion under 16 back a few years ago, just a couple of years ago.
Too many.
Yeah, too many. And since then he focused, in his early 20s, he got to focus on teaching and producing instructional materials. So that's what we're going to be doing for you guys today. And the topic is Sicilian Dragon.
And the position that you see on the board right now is already maybe the critical position after move 9 long castle. Another DVD will cover move 9 bishop c4. Let's get back to the first move and quickly see how we can get into this position and then discuss a little bit the opening itself. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, capture, capture, knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop e3, bishop g7, dragon, the Yugoslav variation. And this critical position, the heart of the dragon, has two main moves. Long castle, which will be the topic for this DVD, and bishop c4, which is going to be the topic for our next DVD. What is the main difference between those two moves, the way that you see it, Timo?
Well, so there's the castle and there's the bishop c4. So obviously putting the bishop on c4 adds to this, to the power. The bishop would be striking from b3 actually, because oftentimes it adjusts, and after a little prophylaxis it stays there. For a few moves in certain spots it gets exchanged, but this is the key idea would be to put pressure along this diagonal and combine it with the attack on the king side, where two of those become extremely strong. The idea of castle, the move that I'm going to be focusing on, is to start the attack as soon as possible. So the logical conclusion to this situation should be that black got to go for d5 in this position. That's the line we're going to be focusing on.
Not only going to d5, do something and something quick in the center. Just a general comment. If we go back a move and look at the lines with bishop c4, like you mentioned, Timo, after bishop c4, bishop going to b3, many times black plays knight to e5 or a5 followed by rook c8. The knight goes to c4 either way and white will capture it. But if the bishop stays on f1, the bishop is still attacking c4, only that white is not wasting two moves, bishop c4, b3, then capturing, which means black cannot, absolutely cannot stick to the normal plans, bishop d7, rook c8. He will just be killed on the king side. Therefore, after castle, we either see plans such as knight take d4, bishop take d4, and bishop e6, which is one major alternative to d5. Some other sidelines that, well, we consider really sidelines, and obviously the main one, by far the main one, which is d5, playing in the center immediately.
So d5 is the classic breakthrough in the center. White faces a decision here, and for people who are familiar with the theory, the decision becomes critical with the options of e takes d, knight d5, knight c6, b takes c, the classical line following knight d5, accepting the pawn sacrifice, the modern line bishop d4, logically going for the exchange of this dangerous dragon bishop on g7, and a couple choices here. So king b1 is an option played in the game 𝐃𝐫𝐚𝐠𝐿, and queen e1. So we're going to start our analysis with king b1.
Right. Out of those three moves, I would say that king b1 seems to be the least known one, or the least played one by many top players. There is this 𝐃𝐫𝐚𝐠𝐿 and some other strong players. We will see games and we will mention them, but definitely e take d5 is absolutely the main line. And queen e1 also extremely logical move, just having the rook aimed at black's queen, which prevents black from easily dissolving the center with d take e4. Actually, the same idea appears with king to b1, because right now capturing is actually a mistake that is losing the game on the force, in view of the queen is under attack, and queen take d2 is not a check. The king is on b1, game is over. So black has to look for a move, an idea to play. And there are two very interesting moves that we will consider. Rook b8, such an interesting idea. Black is preparing for a possibility of white capturing on c6 and already putting his rook on the possible b file, just to keep you thinking this is how the game 𝐃𝐫𝐚𝐠𝐿 continued. And amazingly enough, it was played in other games and not a joke. But we will start with the capture on d4. Now, if you're familiar or not familiar, why don't you take a minute or two, pause the video, and what would you play with white? What would you play with white, Timo? What would be your first instinct here?
I would definitely look at bishop d4. However, I would actually, taking a step back, playing king b1, I would consider knight d4 as the possible option. So if it's a serious game, and if I were going for this line, I'll try to find more than just the obvious bishop d4 has to offer. So after bishop takes d4, d takes e, pawn captures on e4. Again, there's no tactics with bishop f6, because queen just goes exchange and bishop captures f6. So actually black is going to be a little bit better in that position. And after f takes e, black is going to be following with a logical bishop e6. And think about this position for a couple of minutes. We're going to realize that, okay, white has a weakness on e4 right here, and black's pieces are well placed. There's a weak squares around the center, primarily e5, where a knight can establish itself. Then queen a5 could be potentially interesting idea. There's been some games here in this variation, and with good results for black, actually quite a few times. The idea is associated primarily with, let's say, bishop e2, queen a5, knight d5. So what generally happens in this spot is things get exchanged, and position gets very close to being a draw. So here in this position, white gets really creative, though, and it's not one of those moves that you can really come up on the spot. Rather, it wouldn't be wise to really wait for this spot to come up with the move. So here white goes ahead and continues this interesting e5.
What a beautiful move. I remember the first time I was looking at this line long time ago, and just fascinating. Instead of capturing the knight, attacking the other one, and black basically is forced to play knight f5. All other alternatives are just bad for black to very bad for black. For example, knight d7, we just capture the pawn, and after knight take e5, very simple, putting pressure against the knight, knight goes somewhere, and simple. No big questions that white is just better. He has some potential pressure against the king, 3 against 2 on the queen side. The d file, white is just somewhere between slightly to more than slightly better here. The other alternative after e5 that we also can reject very quickly is knight take f3. It was played in a game played by Caruana. He was on the white side against a much weaker opponent, and after capture and knight capture d5, white has a lot of pressure here, basically quite for free. e6 was played, and this is just absolutely winning for white. The queen has no squares to go, and f6 just loses material quite on the spot. So really, if we go back to e5, the main square, the main move to go to would be knight to f5. White obviously captures, and here fascinating alternative with bishop take f6.
So here we had an interesting discussion with Ronen, and knowing my style, he set up a position that we're going to get in a couple moves and ask for my opinion. So my first instinct is to say it's very good for black, definitely take black. And then considering really the position in depth, you will realize that the material is material. So let's get to that spot first. E takes f, bishop takes f6. So kind of logical now. Knight takes on d5. So if obviously the threat is to go knight f6, whether it's a bishop or not. So if bishop g7, then knight goes to f6, and white is going to be winning this game. So here,
no, it actually transposes.
Queen d5.
Knight f6 take.
Oh, okay, knight e3. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So let's just delete that part.
So knight d5, bishop g7. Very interesting situation. What happens is the position transposes in a quite a curious way. Knight f6 looks like it's winning the game. Bishop f6, queen d8, and if rook takes, then rook takes rook, and then basically the black's piece cannot get out of a8, and black is in bad shape. But here knight e3, and obviously sacrificing the queen is not going to be an option. Black has way too many pieces and easy ways to get out. So queen comes back, knight captures the rook, queen captures the knight. Let's get to this position the way you would do playing the main line. So here, queen d5. Actually, black forcing this transformation. So queen d5, knight e3. Queen must retreat, and we take. So we reach the situation with the queen on d1. And as I'm saying, my first instinct is to say, you know what, the black has this beautiful pair of bishops, and the rook's going to be doubling on d, really controlling the game. Computer's assessment is +1 advantage for white, which is really a significant advantage, not something to ignore. However, the results in this situation are actually very, very, very favorable for black. So for you guys who are out there who want to take chances and play an interesting game, you're welcome to try it out. Some really strong players played in this position. So obviously the classic alternative here would be to take the pawn on f6. Ronan, would you want to add something to the tactical queen sacrifice that we got in this situation?
No, you just mentioned the players, and I think we discussed the Adams against 𝐕𝐴𝐴 game.
Yes.
That not only that he sacrificed the queen for a rook and a bishop, but he followed with another exchange sacrifice. So actually, he had a position of 2 bishops and a pawn for a queen, but he managed to open the position that he was at no point in danger of losing. It was absolutely a 𝐕𝐴𝐴 moment there. So E take f6 is the more sound, if we can put it that way, possibility. Mainly, I would say that bishop take f6 is interesting and not easy for white to really do something, although, like we mentioned, a computer like white, and in the long term it might be more comfortable for white. But black really doesn't have many winning chances there. If white doesn't want to lose, he's probably not going to lose with the queen. While here, the game gets extremely complicated. Queen take d5 is, of course, very nice for black, incredible. Bishop on g7, the other bishop can go to e6. Black is very pleasant here. So, bishop c5 is the right move for white, with the idea that if black doesn't sacrifice the exchange, like happens in many of those lines, but goes with rook e8, then white is just better in this position. The center.
So as Ronan mentioned, the key quality of this variation compared to the previous variation we discussed is that the game gets a little more double-edged. In this position, though, white really dominates the center, so that indicates white's big advantage, especially considering that dragon bishop having no use at this point and trying to activate it from h6 is going to run into f4.
Or even queen c3, something maybe to consider.
Exactly, and one thing to notice, something that just came up to my mind is, throughout our analysis, the times that we see white really being really well centralized, black experiences difficulties, especially transforming closer to the endgame, and a lot of the pawn sacrifices die in the face of really, really powerful centralization, kind of going back to the basics of chess. Put your pieces in the very logical spots in the center.
That is correct. So we have black making effort to avoid this by a sacrifice, which is very much in the spirit of all those lines. If you're looking at the DVD and you're counting your material, you should change into a Petrov DVD or something like that. Here we are not counting that much material. So, bishop take f8, queen take f8, knight to b5, knight to e3. Obviously, black purpose is playing bishop h6 in some lines, f5, bishop f5. Black is in the game here. Well, white has to do something about the rook on d1. If he's just going to give it, the material will be equal. Let's assume he's going to take the d4 pawn, but with those pair of bishops, white is not in a nice shape if he gives it away. So we have two moves that we will consider, rook e1 or rook c1. Let's start first with rook e1.
So here black goes ahead and plays f5. So black had no intention of removing that knight from e3. However, now we gotta really consider what's gonna happen after the very straightforward knight d4. So let's think for a few seconds, considering black's options. f4. This is really the only way to continue in this position. Taking the bishop on f1 obviously not satisfactory, then there's not too much tactical space for black to develop the attack on the king side or anything. We've got to play f4. White considers their options and plays g3. So kind of trying to break this defense of the knight. Black continues queen d8, attacking the knight on d4, knight b3. If c3, the diagonal along f5, b1 exposes, and after bishop d4, black is going to be preparing for a decisive bishop f5. C takes d, bishop f5, bishop d3, queen d4, and it's impossible for white to unpin. So white goes ahead and continues knight b3. Queen f6, yes. Finally we see the threat along this big diagonal. queen c1. So white has no desire whatsoever to weaken this diagonal once again. We know what happens here. So queen c1, bishop f5, bishop d3, bishop d3. So here, this is about the spot where I feel very confident black is going to have some tactical opportunities, some opportunities to get the material back, or just continue creating counterplay and creating threats. So bishop d3, c takes d, queen f5, and in this position we must prefer black. White really got to go for rook e3. It's impossible to tolerate the knight on e3 any longer. So rook e3, f takes 3, queen takes, and queen d5, with the idea of a5 and bringing the rook to e8. So now we're gonna go ahead and continue with f4 and consider black's options here.
Yes, this f4 is actually a very interesting move, played not in a very old game, like 2.5 years ago. Nisipiano against Radjabov. Obviously, Radjabov, one of the leading experts in the world. Well, actually in anything, considering he's player number 5 in the world after the big 4. So really, if you want to consider humans, Radjabov is just the top one out of the humans. Queen c5, protecting the pawn and putting some pressure against c2. c3, but here we see black's other idea with the move c5. At the right moment, for the right price, black will be willing to eliminate the bishop, removing this mighty knight, but is getting some material. Only move rook e8, taking on f1 immediately after black captures on b5, he controls e8, that will be game over. So here, incredible position where a rook for 3 minor pieces, but the knight on f1 is on f1 and not on e4. The rook on a8, the bishop on f8, the bishop on c8, none of them is in the game.
So everything is pinned.
Everything is pinned. Like really, bishop, the queen is only piece that can really play. Queen d8. Alright, a check. King goes to c2. And amazingly enough, black doesn't really have any ideas other than at some point give back material, either with queen takes rook right now, or maybe first some check, and then queen takes rook. This position is not very clear, maybe a little bit in white's favor, maybe, and this is a very critical line. In the game was drawn, and I know Timur is a big fan of blacks in those positions, but again, it's the difficulty of if black can really free himself or not. If the rook, for example, was on c6, not on a8, I would say that I think black is winning strategically.
Exactly. What would be your opinion, Ronan, or rather, like how do you see the game evolving in the next few moves? So it seems like black would play something along the lines of b6 on the next move. So here rook d1, b6, rook d8. So right here, black really experiences a checkmate, not the difficulty, but checkmate. So here we gotta really come up with something radical. So knight goes to f6. So this would be the only move to continue, and then queen e5, keep putting pressure. So here we would consider something along the lines of knight g4. So if queen e8, we're gonna make a draw right here. Queen goes to d8, king goes to g7. So here it looks like the rook is not going to be invading the 8th rank, and black finally going to have some ways to get the rook out. When the rook gets out, black is going to be feeling very comfortable. So guys, now let's go ahead and continue with the feature game of the variation, where black goes ahead and continues bishop h6 after rook goes to c1.
Yes, and this is a game short against Carlsen, so we already have in another line Nisipiano Carlsen, we have Nisipiano Radjabov, this one is short Carlsen, so we have those players that play this line, to me, as someone that has been analyzing and writing articles and going over lines for a long time, it is somewhat of a direction. When I see those players keep repeating it different years, it means, all right, this is where the battle is. Those players are job of Carlsen. They believe that they can play it for black, that they will have ideas, even if some previous games show white is tiny better, they come up with novelties. That's exactly what we are looking here.
So the hidden advice within Ronan's comment is really see, like, when you guys analyzing the games and pick the database with quite a few games out there, trust the number of players that are really strong, extremely strong, playing the variation rather than the number of players playing that variation. So just pay attention to the very, very top players playing that line. That's got to be the main line.
Exactly. I always say, with no offense, I prefer to see Anand Carlsen, 𝐕𝐴𝐽𝐼𝐶, Topalov, to see 1, 2, 3 games rather than to see 100 games of even decent players, but it just tells me much less. So bishop h6, queen takes d4, knight f5. And here is a big question. Should white grab the pawn and give black even more development with a queen in somewhat awkward spot, or should just retreat and tell black, okay, you can take the material, but, well, maybe I'm going to have some 3 against 2 on the queen side. Queen f2 is another possibility, but it just seems that black is just getting easily back the material and some. We have the critical position of the d5 on move 9 line, where white took on d5, took on c6, and now he's faced with a very critical choice, whether he's going to take the pawn or he's going to play bishop d4, fighting against the bishop on g7. The way that I view, in general, all those gambits that many people, especially club players, like to play, you have to know what happens if your opponent accepts the material. You have to. So to say, oh, bishop d4 is what most strong grandmasters playing, that is correct, but most club players are not going to play a strong grandmaster tomorrow. So what do you do if your opponent really take the pawn on d5, right? You're not going to tell him, hey, didn't you see the last Carlsen game? He played bishop d4. I'm just saying, I don't think actually Carlsen had exactly that position with bishop d4. But in general, hey, your opponent took a pawn. What do you do now? Well, you cannot exchange queens. You're just going to be a pawn down, with white having 3 pawns against 1 on the queen side. So black has this resource, queen c7. Without this move, this entire d5 line would just be unplayable. White really only move here is again to fight for the exchanges of the queen, because Timur, like you analyze quite deeply, queen take rook is actually not really that great possibility for white.
So let's go ahead and examine the most straightforward approach. Queen takes rook, bishop goes to f5, and now it's impossible for white to both defend the c2 square and save the queen. So the best move for white is to capture the rook and give up the queen, and after king captures, which is very important to keep that bishop on the diagonal, rook goes to d2. So now queen e5 is not possible because the d8 square is still not covered. Or here, a very important move that black plays, it's h5. Now it's important to mention, though, if white goes ahead and plays kind of the more straightforward defensive move, bishop d3, black immediately attacks queen e5. And if white tries to get tricky, bishop f5, trying to play rook d8, black captures on e3, very important. And after king b1, queen goes to b6, d8 covered, and the b2 is being attacked. So black is winning. Right here, rook d2 is the move, and very important to play h5 to stop white from expanding on the king side and kicking the white squared bishop out. And after bishop d3, queen e5 is still highly unpleasant. Queen e3, bishop e4, and bishop h6 basically going to be creating winning chances for black. So here, white got to play bishop e2, and very important for you guys to know once again, king g8, to get the king off the way, remove all the possible threats of d8, 8th rank, checkmates, and have the full capabilities to implement the bishop-queen attack. At the same time, the king side structure is a bit vulnerable, so black is going to have some opportunities to get the material back. So now let's get back to the main line, which is queen goes to c5.
Black has two possibilities here. It's already clear that black is not going to exchange the queens, so is it going to be queen b8 or queen b7? If you open databases, you will see that queen b7 by far is the more played move. Yet, we would like to present you with some new ideas with the somewhat sideline queen b8, also played by strong players. In the queen b7 line, we can mention some important games such as Ivanchuk Fedorov and a recent game played in the United States between Wesley So and Robson. You can see those in our attached games. That black does get the B and C file and a lot of what seem to be very dangerous threats against white king, but with accurate play, it looks like, well, maybe black can be okay, but it's not very easy for him. Queen b8 has the idea of keeping the queen on the dark squares, which is a critical idea. Also, since it is not the main line, it might come as a little bit surprise to your opponent. So having it a reasonable line and somewhat of a surprise, we think it's a reasonable combination.
So here there's two options, b3 being the main line. Queen a3 is another possibility. So after queen a3, it's important to play bishop e6 rather than bishop f5. After bishop e6, the bishop targets the queen side, which is very important. Bishop f5 gets neutralized by bishop d3, having no weaknesses on the queen side because of the subtle queen a3 retreat. So bishop e6, bishop goes to a6. This is the key move for white to restrict black's counterplay. If bishop d3, then black can immediately switch towards attacking efforts, playing queen e5 and capturing the pawn on h2. Essentially, in this position, what oftentimes happens is black doesn't ignore getting the material back, and whenever there's a chance, basically grabs those kingside pawns or attacks those. So here we're going to be examining bishop a6, and here the move that we suggest is queen c7. This is a new move, hasn't been played. The key theoretical line is queen e5.
Yes, this was played in Adams Fedorov in 𝐕𝐚𝐫 2001, where the game continued with g3, rook d8, bishop to f4, queen keeps staying on the long diagonal, rook he1, bishop f5. Without huge analysis, well, let's just show how the idea continued. c3, I believe in some analysis this move was criticized, and now very powerful. The queen is aiming to enter to f2, and after bishop e3, stopping that, extremely powerful bishop h6, and black is already better in Adams Fedorov, another game that you can see. So why don't we recommend Queen E5? It has to do with the move Bishop D4, Queen G5, and here very impressive analysis by Timo, Queen to E3, and after the very straightforward just taking the pawn, let's just mention the Queen A5, obviously a move that we have to consider. Here again a beautiful idea, just take, and Bishop C4. The tactical ideas just saves white. And again, everything is hanging, but white managed to basically push back. But white managed basically to push black completely back. No attack on A2 now, since the queen cannot stay on any square that will attack it, and basically the game is practically finished at this moment. So queen take G2 instead of Queen A5 is the most logical move, and here exchanging the queens, which this position is slightly better for white. It looks like his pawn and king can be somewhat more dangerous than black. I mean, we are not saying that white is much better, probably not, but it's just clear that white is the one with somewhat upper hand in this position, or the more comfortable one. So this is all Timo's fresh analysis, and therefore the move that he suggests, and I will allow him to present it, is Queen to C7.
So after Queen C7, black is basically planning to mobilize the pieces, and an interesting point is that after Queen C5, every time white plays Queen C5, black comes up with this Queen B6 idea, where the bishop is hanging and the B2 is hanging, forcing white to either exchange the queens, and after takes, rook is going to be coming through, capturing the pawn. So here the viable option is to play bishop b5, but then black continues to attack on the queen side, and basically going with the straightforward attack, including rook c8. This is going to be a dangerous position for white to be in. So right here, c3 is a consideration, which is the engine suggestion right here. Computer moves, including c3, basically allow black to still get a very good game with a powerful counterplay. Rook takes d8, rook captures. It's interesting to point out that in this type of situations, it's very advantageous for black to exchange one rook, since then if black maintains the pressure on the d file, black is going to be getting counterplay, and at the same time there's more points of penetration where white is not holding quite as much control in the center. So rook goes to d8, capture, queen c5, queen b8, preserving the queen. Obviously no point in exchanging the queens. Queen goes to a5. So basically here a little maneuver that could work for black. This is a very workable position for black, but here's just a few moves to kind of show the extent of black's creativity in these situations. Bishop comes through the other diagonal, and basically black connects with the counterplay chances through this diagonal, coming in with the queen, exchanging, creating chances, attacking the king side, or possibly switching towards other opportunities. So here we're gonna go ahead and examine the b3 move now.
After b3, the bishop will go now to f5, not to e6 as we have seen in the previous line. Bishop d3 is obviously the very straightforward possibility, and another one is a move that we mentioned before with very similar idea, controlling the c8 square. Yet again, queen to b6, since after the exchanges, black has play on the a file, bishop to c4, and now the queen is going to the long diagonal. Bishop d4 is being met with queen to g5 check. Again, that those soft g2 h2 pawn that are always target. Rook d2, it just seems like white is tied up in this position. And after queen d4, queen c6, queen c6 after queen d4, where I believe that if queen c5 we might just have a repetition, queen back to f6. White maybe want a little bit more, but queen c7, and we can reasonably stop at this moment, maybe one or two more moves. Just let's see if white goes and make effort to exchange the bishops, always something to consider. Rook to d8, exchanges and centralizing the queen, going to a1, king b1, and now black shifts attacking on the c and b file. The idea is rook takes c4 followed by rook to b8, and white retreats, and this absolutely beautiful idea. Bishop takes with a perpetual for black, and if the king take on c2, queen e2 is the move to follow. So after king take c2, black has an amazing resource, obviously all in regard to computer analysis, and basically getting into the same type of perpetual. The rook is attacking the bishop, and we're going to have another type of perpetual. King to c1, and then we can just play queen to c5, king b1, queen f5, king b2, queen e5, and that's just a draw. Very, very deep line, but in the dragon they are not rare. So we see that black has many resources, even if white making big efforts to eliminate the dark color bishop, black has his other resources. So this amazing tactical idea, rook takes c2, gives black a draw, either bishop take or the king take. Bishop take is very straightforward, capture, capture, rook c8, and now just queen f5, queen e5. If the king goes to a3, queen a5 is minimum a draw, maximum also. King take is a bit more fascinating. A king a1, queen e5 would be the same. A king takes c2, those are really fascinating lines here, where black is playing rook check to c8. Queen e2 is not enough in view of queen block and king to b2, and well, white is just, well, winning. So after king takes c2, rook c8 is a great move, but okay, king b1 and rook to d8. This is the big idea. The rook is the one that is attacking the bishop. If the bishop take the bishop, queen take. King c1 actually even loses the game after rook c8, and suddenly white king will get into checkmate patterns. So black has an amazing resources idea in this position, which is rook takes c2, which leads to basically a draw in all lines, unless white would like to see if he can get more, and he might even lose the game. Bishop takes c2, this is the simplest line. Bishop take bishop, the king captures the bishop, rook to c8, the king has to go to b1, and now just simply queen to f5. If king to a1 or to b2, simply queen to e5 is a draw, and there is no way for the king to escape from perpetual on e5, f5, and a5, for example. King take rook. This is much more exciting line. Black's only way to play here is rook to c8, since the tempting queen e2 fails in view of getting back the queen from far away to defend, and after bishop take bishop, the king goes to b2, queen e5 will be met with queen to c3, and that's pretty much it if black goes for another check. This means that black has to find something here. That something is rook check, and this amazing move, the bishop is more important than the rook, so rook goes to d8. If the bishop goes to c2, okay, we can easily get into the same position that we had before. This is just a perpetual. And what happens if bishop take f5? Well, the same idea. If the king goes to b2 or a2, black just responds with a check and repeating. And if the king goes to c1, white actually might be in great danger, maybe just losing after rook to c8, since now king to b2 loses on the spot to rook c2, and white is basically just getting checkmated. King a1, queen e5, king b1, rook take g2, and then checkmate, queen e5, and king a3, checkmate immediately. And if the king goes to d2, rook to c2, king e1, just checkmate this way, followed by queen e2, and king e3. Well, this is, I will leave you with the pleasures of finding checkmate, but alright, let's just finish it this way. So, some very long lines. They're probably drawish, we follow computer lines, but they were really very long. So if we go back to the position after bishop f5, instead of bishop a6, we see the very straightforward bishop to d3.
So right here, we're getting to the main lines. Just to mention the quality of the analysis right here. Let's say in the variations of the rook c2 sacrifice. What's interesting is basically how deep the analysis gets, and what you guys got to be looking for. The opportunities are really unlimited. So what's important is to be familiar with the ideas. So now getting back to this main spot, b3, bishop comes to f5, and here that's where black oftentimes realizes the benefits of having this diagonal. So black is really looking to get the queen active on that diagonal, including that queen e5 spot that having the queen on b8 allows. So here bishop goes to d3, and rook goes to c8. If white decides to play bishop a6, now black has this cool maneuver, queen b6. Okay, so bishop d3. Here we got the rook c8, queen a5, and we're gonna go ahead and continue rook c3 right here. So black is starting this counter attack. Bishop captures on f5. We capture the bishop on e3 rather than the bishop on f5. Bishop goes to e4 and targets the rook on a8. So looks like black is in trouble unless there's this queen f4 idea. And here we're following a game 𝐸𝐴𝐸𝐿, where the best move is king b1, or 𝐸𝐴𝐸𝐿 played bishop a8, which is not the best move. However, it did work out for him in the game. Hodgson played rook b3, and after rook d2, we're not going to get into details, but this position worked out well for white. So this is 𝐸𝐴𝐸𝐿 1996, obviously very cool examples for you guys to learn. And here rook d3 is the move. This is the move that guarantees black advantage. King b1, and rook d2 defense just doesn't work because of bishop c3, and the best move for white is to give up the queen. Otherwise, queen captures on d2, and white is liable to get checkmated. So right here, king b1, and very strong queen d4, attacking the rook on d1 and attacking the checkmate. So here, queen d8 is the only way to survive, giving up the queen. And what's interesting, white is not trying to play this position queen bishop versus two rooks, but rather recapture the bishop. Queen goes to c6 is stronger than some suggestions in the books. Rook goes to d8, and white is planning to double up, which black accepts and captures some pawns on the king side. g4 is an interesting detail. King goes to g7, and black goes ahead and captures pawns on the king side. g5 looks very dangerous for black for just a moment. f5 saves black and allows black to continue playing for a win with those pawns on the king side. It looks like white may have some opportunities to try to make a checkmate, but it's just an illusion. The king is always going to have chances to escape after multiple checks. So here we're getting back to the main line. Bishop d3, rook c8, queen a5, rook goes to c3, bishop f5, rook e3, bishop goes to e4, trapping that rook for a second, queen f4. So now we realize bishop takes a8 is just not a good possibility.
So king b1 is the move to play. Again, those types of moves, queen d8, they just make you kind of jump from the chair. Like, I was sitting and looking at the analysis and like, wow. I mean, queen d8. So here, without going into extremely deep lines, it's clear that black is one pawn down, not that much. You know, in some positions, if you're playing queen's gambit, one pawn down, forget about it. But if you're counting pawns in the dragon, you're probably playing the wrong opening. One pawn down, having this incredible diagonal to play. The rook somehow is on e3. Black has full compensation here, easily. We can say it. Rook to f8, avoiding the immediate exchanges of rooks with rook d8 is a possibility. Queen f6 is another possibility, which white will have to play rook to d8. Basically, the main reason is to get the bishop off the diagonal. Even here, black is very much okay, but rook f8. Rook goes to e2, activating the rook. The bishop now captures. And again, just for one pawn, black is super active. We can see several more moves. h4, queen goes to d4. Now bishop g7 is a big threat. Alright, it is white. It is after the exchanges of queens. Black is not. And after rook d1, rook e1, I don't see much danger for black with those dark squares, the weaknesses on the dark squares. So overall, some important improvement over Ivantschuk Hodson in this line, and the main conclusion is that queen b8 deserve much more attention in recent theory. I would say even at top players level, but definitely at the club player level, I would even consider this to be a more dangerous move than queen b7. And some initiative, basically absolutely for free. So queen f2, bishop e3 just seems to be very easy for black. What else is possible? Alright, just grab the pawn. Queen, take on f6. And here, black is not looking to get the material that quickly, but to develop and play for the attack. Bishop to e6 is the move to play. White has two obvious squares to move the rook on c1 that's under attack, either rook d1 or rook to e1. If rook goes to d1, it seems that black has minimum a draw with bishop g7 and bishop h6, since if the queen goes to g4, knight e3 is attacking the rook on d1, and those are just monster bishops. If queen d4 or anything like it, black just have ridiculous compensation. Another way to consider is actually immediately knight to e3 and basically playing the same version with I consider only white to be in danger in such position. So rook d1 runs into knight e3 type of threats. So what about rook to e1? And here another type of tactical idea, bishop to g7, and the rook on e1 is a target for the queen from b4, but not immediately, because queen b4, white will play c3, so black captures immediately. If king captures the bishop, then queen b4 simply wins, so white eliminates the bishop on e6, and black doesn't take on e6, since then the bishop on b2 falls basically for free, but plays queen b4. To be more precise, I believe that if black would like a draw, he can have it in this position, but black is already playing for more than a draw. It's important to emphasize this point. Queen to b4, some checkmate ideas already. The rook is hanging, rook to e4, only move, check, check, king goes to d1, bishop to f6, a full rook down, but look at the knight on f5 controlling e3, the dark squares, the rook is coming to b8, queen c1, check. If bishop d3, just queen take b5, so giving the knight, but the idea is that, well, exchanging the queens, but not that easy. Black captures with the rook, keeping the queens on the board, and now rook take rook. This is just horrible. I mean, the material is almost equal, and the dark squares with the attack, basically black is winning here the way I see it. And after bishop to d3, another exchange. But look at black's minor pieces. Can you really say that the rook on h1 is much better than such a knight? I don't think so. Rook e1 and already another pawn. I would take black here quite easily. Do you agree, Timo?
Yes, the king is exposed, and basically black is always going to have chances to keep checking, capturing more stuff, and basically using the flexibility of the pieces and possibility to attack the weaknesses to win this game.
So if we go back a move, we have looked at queen f2 and queen take f6, which seems really dangerous, opening the h8 a1 diagonal, but here we have some top players. Well, one of them is the top players in the world today. He was playing for the black pieces, Carlsen, against short with the white pieces. Queen c3 was played. Okay, let's take the material back. Equal material, and exchanging, eliminating the knight. I believe the main reason is to get control of the dark squares, where the position is unclear, but I would say black is in decent shape, or even more than that. This was short against Carlsen from the London tournament 2009. It ended in a draw, but seeing players like Carlsen play such a line give a very easy example, and can tell all of us that, alright, black is just okay in this position.
So here we're going to examine an alternative to knight d4, rook b8 right here. And for the sake of mentioning, basically we're going to introduce you guys to this game between two top players, Nisipiano and Carlsen, where Nisipiano went for this interesting rerouting maneuver. Knight goes towards the queen side, and very cool, knight goes to a7. So let's see how it worked out for him. Pawn goes to e6, basically very solid, good approach. Defend the center, and whenever knight takes on c6, basically white is in trouble here because of that powerful pressure. This position should be judged as tactically lost for white. So right here, obviously it wasn't 𝐃𝐫𝐚𝐠𝐴's idea. What was 𝐃𝐫𝐫𝐚𝐠𝐴's idea? Nobody knows. But okay, here we go, g4, and rook e8. Very interesting prophylaxis move, basically putting the rook where it's gonna be most active on the e file. White's gonna have to go after some part of the board, and most likely in the center, so the rook comes out very useful. White goes ahead and plays straightforward. Before capturing the pawn, retreats the bishop, and just about ready to capture on d5, introduce that knight in the center. Black doesn't care about saving the pawn, basically develops the bishop, and very cool now. Knight either takes on c6 or gonna be out there on a7, basically not doing very much.
Yes, this is really incredible to see this knight on a7, and considering it is about a 2700 player. Actually, before continuing, which I will allow you to do, Timo, I want to go back several moves, and you mentioned correctly that after knight a7, taking on c6 opens the b file, but what I consider a critical idea, I mean, we have seen how this game went, and at some point you were joking that it was just a normal position, but white has a knight on a7, you will speak about that. How about doing something with this knight, and if it is not to capture on c6, then how about capturing on c8? We can at least see one example where white took on d5, black took back, and okay, we do something with the knight. Overall, black should be okay in this position, but let's see how this funny example worked out. Not so funny for Fedorov. White took the pawn. Obviously, black has play, but the way the game continued was pretty incredible after, well, black thinking he's very smart with some threats on the back rank, only to resign. And actually, for the viewers watching this DVD, maybe they would like to pause for a minute and see themselves if they can find it. Alright, if you thought about take, and bishop b5, solving the back rank problem and winning material, you played like Varga and you just beat Fedorov from 2003. This idea of knight on a7 doing something, capturing on c8, to me seems quite essential for white, since the way the game continued. Oh well, how you said, Timo, nobody really understand what 𝐃𝐫𝐚𝐠 did, including him. So bishop d7, and now
white goes ahead and strikes in the center, seizing the initiative. Queen d5 is not quite the move to go about it. Knight d5 was a better solution, but let's just go ahead and continue with the game. Queen captures on d5. Black goes knight e5, and finally we reach the spot where knight on a7 is just knight on a7 without any targets or prospects. Queen goes to b3. White tries to connect with some attacking opportunities, and really hopes to get somehow that knight connected with the rest of the game. So queen captures on g5. So here we're going to see some straightforward moves. Black keeps going towards the attacking the center, the queen side. Now a little fork right here. Black recovers very quickly, pinning the knight. Here we got a situation where black is doing exceptionally good, let alone the knight on a7. Rook d8. Okay, so here, after a couple moves, black has quite a few more threats compared to a few moves ago, and the trend is going to continue. Rook d1, and basically this is just about the end of the game between Nisipiano and Carlsen.
Yes. Another major move, as you can see on the position on the board, is move 10 for white, the move queen e1 after d5. The idea is, well, doesn't need much introduction, simply having the rook aiming at the queen, so another way to prevent d takes e4. Black has two major approaches. I mean, both of them have to do with the e-pawn, either e5 attacking the knight or e6 defending the center. We are going to actually choose the conservative way of playing, which is e5, which, as we will see, will lead to roughly equal endgame position. We have Carlsen and other strong players that have played it, while e6 leaves complications on the board, but it seems that those complications are more dangerous actually for black than for white. We are not going to analyze it very deeply, but h4 is very much the main move to follow.
Okay, so white is attacking on the king side, as it always happens in Dragon. Black goes ahead and plays queen c7, gaining better control over black squares, connecting the pieces a little more. h5, basically continuing the idea. All straightforward, including the g4. So now black gets a little adventurous rather than just retreating to f6. Knight f6 would probably run into trouble after queen h4. The position should be very dangerous for black. So here, knight d4, basically playing around with the tactical setup. Bishop captures, and now black is exploring tactical opportunities. White connects all of the pieces, and here we get an interesting spot where black's knight is feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but black connects with the tactical opportunities. Here f4, and the knight is about to get captured, but black gets resourceful. This was all envisioned by white.
And if we'll just go back one move, the weaknesses on the dark squares are just incredible in this position. If not this move e3, which is absolutely very, very accurate play by black, the move knight take bishop, which seems okay, very logical. The knight is about to get trapped, but the weaknesses of the dark squares are just enormous. And here g5 absolutely dominating all those squares. And just look at that bishop. e5 makes sense, but still that f6 spot, once white knights get there, oh, those 1-2 extra pawns on the king side, oh, forget about it. e3 was played in the game. Let's just take it several more moves. Okay, it's just one tiny pawn, and already easy to see what's going on after knight d5. Just big advantage for white. Minka against Alterman from London 94, and well, white just won this position. So this move e3 is really a critical one. Also, this position seems maybe somewhat unpleasant, but more playable, I would say. Exchanges. Okay, pawn down. The horrible light squares, dark squares, are still there, but without queens, which is obviously an improvement for black. Nisipiano, which we mentioned, played those lines. We've seen some games of his before against Timofeev. Both players around 2700. It was played in 2008. To my taste, I will ask you, Timur, in a second. To my taste, I would prefer to be white. I mean, I don't like being a pawn down, but I don't like the bishop on c8 more than a pawn down. Well, what do you think?
Well, yeah, obviously black is going to be, is going to have to defend and defend very creatively to hold in this position, which actually Timofeyev did, playing this interesting f5 and trying to escape. So we're not going to get too deep into that and continue with the main line that we're going to present to you guys. So this is the e5 idea.
But the conclusion is basically that even, okay, you require so many reasons. So e5, knight take knight, and here is another critical moment. To take with the pawn or to take with the knight. The main move is actually knight take. But then again, if we go to d5 on the ninth move, let's go back a little bit, we will get very similar type of positions after bishop d4. Well, our DVD is focusing on either bishop take d4, queen take d4, and queen b6. Let me just show it quickly. Or knight takes c3 and bishop h6. And there is a reason that we are not looking so much at e5. It just, to our taste, these days those positions are somewhat favorable for white. So if you take a picture of that position, let's go back now to the version with queen e1, and after e5, capture, capture, you can figure out that it is not such a big difference, knight d5, as opposed to the position that we do not would like to suggest in the main line. Not that they are bad, most likely black is alright there. We just believe that there are other more reasonable, easiest resources for black today. So in that position, we will continue with that line of thinking, and we will take with the pawn. Bishop to g5, putting pressure on everything in the center, and black replies with protecting the most important pawn, bishop e6. Why I say the most important pawn? Because the pawn on e5 cannot easily be captured because of h6, and once white's bishop get away from this diagonal, knight e4 will look like a very nasty discover idea. And if take, alright, well, for one tiny pawn, this is no brainer. So white plays bishop c4, and here black has several possibilities. Queen b6, maybe rook b8, but to my taste, queen c7 seems just the way to go, right?
Yeah, so this is the option for black to continue and basically hold equality after queen c7. Black
some forced exchanges.
Yeah, exactly, some forced exchanges. So here we got this situation, and it's interesting. White, from a positional perspective, looks like white could be a little ahead, especially if the queens go off the board and the knight gets to position itself on a good square, a good attacking square. Now, or at the same time, if the knight moves, black could push the pawn c3 at one point or another. Then there's the b file where black is going to be consolidating. So a lot of times, black has enough counterplay to compensate for certain structural imbalance.
And the two main, I would say, general concepts to follow here is obviously the leading moves, which is knight d5, forcing some exchanges. I would say that practically white is maybe tiny bit better, like you mentioned, but we see Carlsen with black, some other players that are playing and holding reasonably. After those, we will get back to this position. Knight e4 is another possibility, or queen e3. Basically, the knight will go to that square at some point. Well, we can see one game here. We can follow rook to b8, most logical move by far. Knight to e4. There are many other moves that are possible. For example, rook h e1 is one possibility, but for now let's just get the idea.
So this is definitely the approach we examine as one of the key ideas for our viewers to know, since here white keeps the knight and gets it to interact with a queen. That's a powerful interaction. Knight and a queen, traditionally powerful interaction. And let's see what happens. Black gets the pieces along the b file, and white doesn't have much better than just continuing along with offering the queen exchange,
which black obviously rejects.
Finds.
And after rook b8, it is just easy play for black, which actually ended up winning this game very quickly. Tiemann against Hodgson. We mentioned Hodgson in a game against 𝐕𝐴𝐴𝐶, where he missed a beautiful rook d3 tactical idea. This was played in Groningen in 1996, and black won fairly quickly, although the position is not yet very one-sided, but it is clear that black is okay plus, and there we can easily stop and go back to knight to d5. Black has to capture and defend, and we will just show very little some examples of this position. Queen to c3, and here possibly rook d8 exchanges of the rook on d5 is a possibility. It was played by Peter Nielsen, one of Anand's assistants. Says it was a game played in 1991. King g8 is also a logical move, getting out of the pin. And here some moves are possible for white, either rook h to d1, queen a5, g3, or rook e1. We believe that while white is technically somewhat better, black can play this position.
Okay, so here we're gonna go ahead and continue with the most logical approach for white. It's queen a5. White offers queen exchange, basically pursuing the positional concepts in this situation, and black doesn't want to go for the exchanges. Basically finds new ways to get in, new ways to create threats. Queen e7, attacking the king, and g2 spot. Rook goes to e1. Basically, queen g5 is not that big of a deal, since queen d2 defends everything. So black finds a new spot, queen h4. So white is no longer seduced by defensive opportunities like h3, queen g3, queen gets comfortable. Black is finding good counterplay, so, or possibly an e4. So here white gotta go rook e5, looking very good for a second. Now rook d8. So here, just give you guys an idea that okay, you just give up a pawn right there in the center. However, there's still quite a few opportunities, including the fact that white's king is going to be insecure in the first rank, and the king side may be a little exposed. c3 may come at one point or another. So white does play h3, and here we go, c3 right here, right now.
Yes, exactly, and the king on c1 is the real target. Obviously, taking with the pawn doesn't seem like the way to go, and after queen take, queen g5, and take on g2, let's just go another move. Yes, the pawn, white is a pawn up, but f4 and h3 are obviously targets, and black ended up drawing this position, although it ended up being somewhat in white's favor.
Oh yeah, definitely. So for you guys to realize is, now black always going to have counterplay. Certain positions are not going to be quite that pleasant. A lot of times it's a battle, and it's for you to really connect with those ideas, attacking ideas and opportunities. But the mindset, the right mindset for playing the dragon, is essentially always looking for counterplay, always looking for best shots, and being on top of the game mentally. In terms of your mindset, you always got to be in that mindset that there's opportunities, you believe in it, and you're gonna find those.
So basically, this is the critical position in this continuation, this line. Quite forced, I would say. And the question is black okay here or really not? I would say that black is reasonably okay here. He has to play very accurate, and we can see a game of 𝐶𝐶 Carlsen that even Carlsen didn't play the best. On the other hand, I know nobody is playing, almost nobody is playing 𝐶𝐶 tomorrow, and black has enough resources. But this move Queen E7, kind of being too much afraid of the endgame. Actually, the simplest continuation is to exchange queens and then getting rid of the weak pawn on E5, opening some counterplay with E4, where black seems to be quite okay. After Queen E7, well, black is just under a lot of pressure, and yes, it is true that white king is weak on the first rank, and that he might have some ideas with C3, but all in all, it's a pawn, and black has to work hard to prove that he has enough compensation. Compensation he has, enough, probably not fully. C3 was played in order to create some weaknesses over the king side pawns, which indeed Carlsen took, but it's not that easy to win either the f4 or the h3 pawn, and after this maneuver, white seemed to have completely consolidated, and well, I think black made a draw because it's Carlsen. If Carlsen was white, I don't think many players would have dreamed of making a draw. But again, let's go back to the position after Queen A5. Probably just taking and then getting rid of the e-pawn is the way to go. And there are some other games that we can, or positions that we can mention. For example, instead of Queen A5, Rook E1 make a lot of sense, and here yet again E4 and capture on H2. The position is, I would say, very somewhat in white's favor, but by all means playable for black. There are also maybe possibilities to keep the queens on the board. I believe that from the amount of effort and the actual position, this is a very logical way for black to play. You take with the pawn, then H5. A pawn take, and I mean, if rook take E4 seems reasonable, it's going to be a big race, and after take, okay, F5 is a move to consider. I don't think there is much danger for black in such position, at least it doesn't seem so on the surface. Yeah, I mean, black will manage to create a pass H pawn at some point, and he is in decent shape. So this line, as opposed to some of the very aggressive line, is actually a very positional one, where black is tiny passive, but probably not more than just tiny, and it's playable. So here we have really the main position of move 9 long castle in the dragon. White took on d5. He is not taking the pawn, although, as we have seen, this is a very, very serious line that's becoming more fashionable. White exchanging on c6, and then playing this move bishop d4, aiming directly at the bishop on g7. What used to be the continuation for many years, the main one, is e5. White goes bishop c5, and here the fight for the dark squares is so important. Black cannot allow himself to play rook e8, because if you remember the line where the pawn on d5 is being sacrificed, black played queen c7, where after take on a8 he had bishop f5, but here, first of all, the bishop is blocking the c file, and even more importantly, the rook on e8 is under attack.
As well as the bishop is blocked. You know, the black squared bishop is not quite as effective anymore.
Exactly. So black has this resource, and now it is considered, according to every possible theory, book, and games, that capturing is just horribly wrong. The queen captures, bishop h6 is immediate idea, rook b8 and pressure against b2 is an immediate idea, and capture, followed by rook b8 and e4. Oh man. So when looking at such positions, just one major comment. yes, I know that white is an exchange up, but the question that one should ask himself is the bishop on g7, this bishop, is it less powerful than the rook on h1? If the answer is, oh my gosh, that bishop is much better than the rook on h1, here is the answer for yourself. So, white doesn't take the exchange and plays move like knight e4. And this position has lately been considered somewhat in white's favor. He's going to play bishop to c4, the bishop will block the b file, and h4, where white prospect seems to be a little bit ahead. Therefore, the absolute two main moves that we see today, 2012, in the chess world are either knight takes c3, followed by bishop h6, which we are going to examine, and maybe even tiny bit the even more mainline these days, which is taking and queen b6. And those are really the two main suggestions that we have for this line. Do you agree with that, Timo?
Oh yeah, so here, just a couple of days ago, Jones was playing this situation for black, and was very successful. We're going to get to that example later on. So here, in this position, we're going to start with knight c3. Queen captures. So no point in taking with the bishop. Just exchange the queens. Black is doing great. Queen captures, and white is planning to put up some positional resistance on the dark squares and actually get hold of those, and at the same time neutralizing that powerful black square bishop, centralizing the pieces. So here, black goes bishop h6. Now, natural looking move, king b1 runs into e5,
and the game
is over. Yes. So here, bishop e3, bishop captures. So we reach this situation where black continues queen b6. So now it's important to look at the position and just see what's happening. Here, obviously, the pawn on e7 is hanging, so that's that's actually the main line. And here's a couple logical possibilities where white doesn't accept the pawn sacrifice. One of them is to exchange the queens, a3, defending that pawn right there, bishop e6. Long story short, fine for black.
Yeah, we have example of game Bakov Grishuv's 2,700 plus players, and no reason for black to have difficulties once his pawn structure is fixed on the queen side.
No problems in quite a few ways that black can equalize. So here, queen c3 is another possibility. Obviously, kind of in a dragon spirit, white doesn't want to be exchanging queens, but going to want to be going for some attack. So here, bishop comes to e6, very logical. King goes to b1 is one move. Then we have the situation with queen f2, where black is going to be taking charge of the game. However, after this bishop d3, as you can see, white decides to sacrifice and then develop some initiative on the king side, having sacrificed the one pawn. So here, rook d6. Now if white plays rook g1, then black just stands behind the pawn, and this h5 ideas are just going to be taking more pawns right there, and the breakthrough is just not going to be possible. So black is doing all right. So here black continues rook d6, h5. So white is getting this dream attack going on. However, black has enough resources to make this position playable and objectively even better for black. So the attack is just not going to be enough. So here we're going to examine another possibility where white could be playing h4, but first let's take a look at bishop c4.
Yeah, it looks like very positional move in some way, just preparing or aiming towards the end game, exchanging black's powerful bishop on e6, developing, connecting the rooks. We can just show one example. After capture, rook to the d file. And here, very important to emphasize again and again, the queen on b6 has a huge important part in the game, which is simply attacking white pawns on the king side, both Timo and myself were laughing when we had seen one game that black just came with his queen and just picked up all the pawns and won. That was pretty amazing.
Game over. Exactly. You pick up all the material, you just start winning those pawns. Rarely that happens. You just start winning all the pawns. One after another.
And that was finished. So here we have check. First of all, hey, let's kick the king away. And queen f2. We have two very strong grandmasters. 𝐲𝐾 against Azarov, playing this in 2009. The game was drawn in many more moves, but black is perfectly okay. So bishop c4, just take and fight for the d5. So this leaves us with h4.
Okay, so h4 obviously the more aggressive, in the spirit of dragon. So here we're gonna have a couple options. If you can play rook f d8 or rook a d8. To be honest, for you guys, you can experiment, try different options. But okay, we're gonna give you the main line right here, which is rook f d8. But first, let's take a look at rook a d8 real quick. Bishop d3, very logical. White is preparing h5. Rook comes out to d5 with some possibilities, including rook c5 and rook a5. White continues h5, rook c5, and rook mobilizes towards the attack on the king side. So here, this is an example of a game, Shankland-Pavlidis, where black went a little berserk right here, and to give you guys heads up, this wasn't a good combination, but to kind of expand your mind for the dragon, let's just examine this real quick.
It was very funny what happened here.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun game. To give white credit, this is a cool maneuver. As computer says, there's quite a few, but really this is just a brilliant idea. Rook connects with the defensive side, and here white is really up to win some material. Bishop c4.
But actually, queen f2 is the best move that would have won the game for white. And the amazing part of bishop c4 is that it's, well, you will continue, Timo. You were the one that told me about this line. That's quite amazing.
d4 right here, so that's the line that Ronan mentioned. Basically, white neutralized all the threats. Looks like black about to checkmate somehow, sacrifice. No, this is
finished.
This is finished. Yeah, as far as black's ambitions to go for the attack, because you gotta remember, there's a little revenge waiting for black. So after bishop c4, this is a mistake. Queen e6 check. King moves to f8. Surprisingly, the game ended in Shankland's favor. However, if we examine the situation right here, queen captures, and then we have queen e3 right here.
And a simple perpetual.
Yeah, exactly. Rook d2, queen e1, and then we're just going to be repeating the moves with a draw. But okay, let's just move on. We're not going to get into mysteries of
how he won. I mean, did he go somewhere else, or did he just miss the perpetual, black player? But that was kind of amusing.
So here, rook f d8. This is the main move, the main consideration here. So here, white is going to be continuing bishop d3. If rook d8, black is just doing perfectly fine. So here we're going to come to the analysis of bishop d3.
Well, white wants to keep the rooks on the board. The main reason is that he would like to have some attack with the h rook. And here, as a difference with an idea that we have seen repeatedly, queen to d4. For example, now queen d4 runs into take, and bishop e4, where black is tiny and comfortable. He doesn't have a very easy c5, so he will have to play rook c8. White can activate the rook with rook d4, a4. If the black rook was on b8 and he can play c5, it looks like it's just okay.
To kind of help the viewer connect a little bit, because we just showed you guys a crazy example. Here, okay, we gotta give you this idea right here. Queen d4. Maybe we mentioned just a few moments ago. However, this is really the key, because here white is the one that's going to be dictating the action with this h5, and black is the one who has to parry that. And okay, yeah, black doesn't have much better than going for the endgame, where black is going to be most likely equalizing.
Right. So therefore, the move instead of queen d4 immediately, queen e3, is something that we will consider a bit more. Sorry. king to b1, and now c5. Again, queen to d4, white captures, and bishop e4. The threat or idea is c4 right now, h5, and queen d4 right now, since if capture, black can capture either way, but even if capturing with the rook right now, bishop e4 is not going to force rook to c8, protecting the c6 pawn. So white captures, capture, and very, very logically, well, retreat with the queen. The idea is, well, get the queen somehow to the h file, and, well, black king might be somewhat shaky, although really I do not think that he is. In some situations, the queen will go to h4. Right now, yeah, the queen on d4 is just a monster dominating everything. But c4 is an idea, going to an endgame that way. I mean, a5 was played in some tournament games, but let's follow this idea. And this type of endgame is a little bit better for black as opposed to the ones before. Overall, it's probably equalish. In the other position, black was slightly worse. And Timo, as you pointed out, it's incredibly important for black to play very active. So getting the king up, and here we have the king from g8 suddenly jumping already to e6. We can just show tiny bit ideas and activating now the rook on the 5th rank with just, well, something like, I wouldn't say draw, but absolutely double-edged endgame.
So we kind of went through this real quick. Let me just emphasize a couple of points. In this fast maneuvering situation, you can see, like, first point right here. Okay, so we got this endgame where black is feeling comfortable enough while black is going to be active. So king moves on right here. So we got this weak spot. We got to remember, white king wants to jump right here and have this weakness always under control. We cannot just lose that pawn. So black got to be creating chances as opposed to just waiting for white to continue building up the advantages. So improving the king, and here bishop d5, weakening that c4 pawn a little bit once the bishops are gone. Improve the king, so this is very important. In dragon endgames, you guys are going to be activating the king as fast as possible, directing it towards weaknesses, or most often towards the center. So here a couple checks, and here if king d2, we push c3. This is one of the ways. Once again, you gotta keep active. You gotta be creating counterplay, and that sacrifice will allow black to get active, attack other weaknesses. So rook e3, rook c5, getting the rook active, improving the king. You see, rook attacks the pawn, and now this endgame is going to be drawn after this. Here's another cool point. You got to be really attuned to evaluation, to good evaluation in dragon, because a lot of the positions require the evaluation. So you got to have good judgment for the typical positions. How do you develop that judgment? How do you develop that good judgment? Well, you got to be examining the examples, and we're going to include quite a few of the examples that we discussed and mentioned. They're going to be all available to you guys. So here, king d5. So black has enough counterplay. This position is going to be a draw if both players play perfect. So let's get back to one of the critical positions that are going to be arising in the middle game.
So instead of queen c3, the more positional move, we can have queen take e7, obviously, bishop e6, and here one main move, which is queen retreats to a3, the most logical move, defending the king and protecting the a2 pawn. Or we can show quickly, if queen f6, I think black has two possibilities. First of all, capture on a2, b3 and capture. I mean, somewhat resembles the Shankland game, although, those ideas are so basic in the dragon. Although this is, of course, extremely typical, and this is alright.
The king is wide open, so something's going to happen there. And here you can see queen b2, queen is going to hide, and then black is going to go for revenge. So yeah, queen retreats, and
there are two rooks on the board, and the king, there are two rooks on the board. The king is totally open. We have Topalov, okay, no need to introduction, against Georgiev, one of the biggest professionals in the world, playing the dragon for 20 years. I mean, okay, this game is from 94, but he's been in the top dragon play in the world about 20 years. The game was drawn. Another even more simpler approach after queen f6, just bring the rook to d8, rook f, and here, if exchanging rooks, okay, then grab the pawn and back. We have several 2400 players play this. This was reasonable for black, and if not capturing, just developing. Same story. Actually, here there's a pretty cool line. The rook attacking b2, and now after rook e7, white is aiming for some ideas. Well, different type or same idea of perpetual from Shankland game by playing rook d7, and this type of draw where the bishop controls the b1 square.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, this is a cool one. There are also some other ideas that we can mention.
Just to give you guys heads up, there's going to be a lot of variations with quite a few complexities. So don't really bother remembering the particular moves or tactical combination. Rather, really focus on the idea. So here you can, what we can point out is that black captures that pawn and gets away with it.
Yeah, there's another possibility that we will mention very quickly is bishop d3. We will just show one or two examples. Queen e3 check is logical. The rook blocks. We're gonna attack the queen, and now
pick up the pawn once again.
Again, exactly. And I remember when I was doing some analysis with a Grandmaster Smerdon, and he was saying when you want to play for a draw against a super strong player, what do? You think you're going to play some simple solid line? Well, the 2700 there, 2700 because they torture for 6 hours. But if you go to a complicated theoretical line, there you might fight against them.
Such as Dragon or Najdorf, be well prepared, and you can create some tough time for those really top guys.
And here, Smerdon that is, 2500 Grandmaster, but playing here against Dominguez at 2700 for so many years. And
obviously, no point right here. It's obvious, like last time we were getting into endgames a lot here. No need to get into endgame, no desire to get into endgame. We want to keep the queen. Because there's a couple weaknesses right there. c6, a7, the bishop is a bit in trouble, so we really got to keep the queens on board to create attacking chances. And really, this position is preferable for black.
Yeah, the big difference is that white exchanges a pawn for the e pawn, and in the endgame, no doubt is going to be better for white because of those weaknesses. Black cannot create a pass pawn on the king side, so it's just 3 against 3 equal on the king side, and white is just better on the queen side. Therefore, endgame does not make much sense as opposed to before. And okay, the game was drawn. It's Dominguez, 27 and above against Smerdon from the World Cup 2009. And we just mentioned how amazing it is playing such complicated line if you really want to make a draw against someone like that.
So here they repeated a couple of moves. Either way, black continued on to play for a win, playing bishop e6, and so on and so forth. So obviously, this is a really desirable position with a lot of chances for black.
The main move is rook a d8. Before that, I will just mention quickly one, rook
so here
f8.
We're going to consider queen a3 as the main line, and rook goes to d8.
Right, and we cannot ignore, even though it was a bit wrong continuation, but impossible to ignore Kasparov-Topalov game. I mean, when you study something, such a line, I just think important to study from the classics. Like Timur suggested, it's probably impossible for most amateurs to remember everything that we are suggesting here. But the ideas, they are much easier. For example, what white played here, super cool move, bishop a6. The idea, the bishop can go to b7 once black queen leaves b6. So c5 was played because queen b6, bishop b7, and now when the queen cannot go to f2 and attack those pawns, going back, c4, and f4. The queen will come to f3 to defend. Rook d4 was played. Okay, there are some ideas suggesting c3, but they are just not going to be enough. And here take, and white already clear managed to improve a lot. Queen f2, queen f3. And on the next move, white just want to consolidate with rook d1 or queen c3. Topalov played c3, and Well, because of the king. I mean, if white king was on g1, maybe we could have, well, black could have made some faces and think he's okay, but after c4, king c3, Kasparov just went as straightforward and just won the game. This was Kasparov-Topalov from Amsterdam 1995. But just an example why rook fd8 not being played anymore.
Exactly, it just doesn't work in this situation. So here we're gonna use rook ad8 right here. There's examples of queen f2 and a5, which doesn't quite bring black as much success. They're both playable options, but not quite as good. So here we're going to examine rook ad8. Bishop comes to d3, which is very logical. Here we got to mention though, rook comes to d5 is the continuation. A lot of times rook goes to d5 and then switches towards the d4 square. So here black is going to be building up on the d file, creating threats. The main move here is b3. In either one of rook h1, rook a5, black is going to be able to pick up the pawn on a2 in the game of Alexeyev versus Caruana. And here, after queen c3, rook c5, queen d4, bishop a2. Once again, that cool idea, black picks up a pawn and manages to do fine in this endgame. Here, there's not quite those weaknesses anymore, so black
right, the pawn is on b6, that's okay.
Fine, yes.
Exactly.
So here we got the b3 situation. Kind of a solid move for white, despite weakening the black squares. White retains really good defensive chances because black is really building up the attack. So black is really looking for compensation for that pawn.
Right, and well, which piece is not taking part in the game? It is the rook on f8. So rook fd8 is the most logical move. And here we have, well, several moves for white, mainly moving the rook, one of the rooks, to e1. Either rook d, which is the main move, because black is really threatening here bishop f5, and if bishop take bishop, queen e3. So the rook from d has to move. If rook h being played, this is just totally okay. I mean, there are no difficulties here for black. So quite only move really to fight.
What happens though if white decides to capture that bishop on f5?
Queen e3.
Queen e3, okay.
Right, so let's just show this one again. For example, and in this example, this is just losing the game. We take and then queen e3. That is the problem. This is why, amazingly enough, it is the rook from d that has to move to e1. And here it is a critical position. I mean, we're already on move 20, but when the lines are so deep, well, there is really nothing else to do but to analyze them a bit more, because it's a pawn down, and if, let's say, we cannot just stop here and say, okay, black has some cool play it. Well, it's a pawn down. Okay, we have basically several key moves to consider. I would say that c5 is one of them, and rook d4 is the other one. Let's actually start with the move rook d4. Rook to e5. Well, what is the idea? What is black threatening? Black wants to play c5 and c4. But why did he play rook d4? Because playing this move, we have seen in the Kasparov-Topalov game, he played bishop e6, provoked Topalov to play c5, then he retreats. No more queen playing everywhere, you know, every square that the queen could have gone is blocked right now, and bishop c4 is just a killer, that's it. I mean, it's a pawn down, and so this black cannot allow. Therefore, he's playing this move rook to d4 with the idea c5, c4, no bishop c4. Rook e5, rook to d5.
Well, rook e5 is the move that would prevent c5 from happening. So
right.
That prevents part of black's counterplay. Very tricky move. And once rook goes to d5, now white's rook just retreats. if white decides to insist on centralizing rook HE1, then once again, as it's typical for dragon, black seizes initiative and going to be recapturing the material. So here, once again, it looks like rook is becoming more active, so definitely works for black, and it does. However, it's essential for white to ease the pressure from this pawn being able to come to c4. So white saves some time breaking the communication between this bishop and the c4 breakthrough. Queen d8.
Yes. Rook coming to h1, from h1 to e1, and now a5. And the idea is that the queen is looking, I would say, at the g5 square for checks many times, and now a4, and aiming to weaken b3 is some idea. I mean, we can stop quite soon here.
We kind of discussed what's our basic judgment on this position. I'm definitely hopeful for black, or rather, I'll take this position for black. Definitely, a4, queen g5 looks very attractive. Just about good enough for this sacrificed pawn.
Right, and this was played by extremely strong players. Wang Hao against Timofeyev, to about 2700 from London 2010, and the game ended in a draw. Black was just in the game all the time, like at no point was black really suffering. So this is one cool idea, d4, and we have another idea that we are going to show on move 20, which is c5 right now. We went back just to show you, and let's see, queen a6, for example, makes a lot of sense, just aiming to exchange, right? And of course black has to reject that idea. Take on e6, and here it is interesting because...
Well, this is something to really emphasize exactly. Here in this position, white gotta do something active as well, There's no a point in trying to defend the position that's getting dangerous with every move. There's no white just doesn't have the capacity to keep playing still. So white gotta go for the counter-attacking chances, and here black really gets creative with this.
Yes.
Queen c3 idea.
Yeah, because if simply capturing and white queen will go to f6, I mean, even the endgame will be maybe tiny uncomfortable for black. The bishop on d3 is just a monster, blocking e2, blocking the d file, and it's two pawns.
Do you think white is looking for a perpetual?
No, I think white is better in this position. I mean, if he will put his queen on f6, I think it will be black that, even in the endgame, black will be suffering. I'm pretty certain about that. That's why...
So what's white's plan? To bring up the rook and just get aggressive with that, right?
Yeah, the king goes to c3, maybe a3, make effort to create some pass pawn on the king side, and, with that bishop on d3 again, white cannot be in danger. This is why queen c3 is an absolutely beautiful move. The threat is rook take d3, so king to b1, and now it's very similar version, only...
What happens right here?
If this position, if rook he1, just take on d3, but also if the other rook goes there, I would just take on d3. Hey, we are already just one pawn, okay, threatening checkmate, and alright, this is the wrong story for white. g2 is hanging, c2, I mean, this is horrible for white. So king b1 is being played, but now black in this tricky way improved the queen. White no longer gonna put his queen on f6, and at any given moment, let's for example consider this. Okay, black, if he wishes, can just make an immediate draw here.
White does have some in-between checks, so this is important to keep in mind. So
but not too much, right? King g8.
King goes to g8, only move,
and that's it.
There's nothing more than there's no way for white to improve those checks or bring in the rook in a forced way to get more than accepting the draw. So here, before we move on with our analysis, I'm going to give you guys this fresh idea in this situation, which is after rook d1, rook d6 right here. So this is an interesting point of analysis here. Rook goes to d6, and doesn't look like the best move in the world. Rook retreats. However, it has a very cool point. So here we're going to illustrate in this particular example. So if rook goes to e5, well, obviously what's the point of rook d6?
Yeah, it's an excellent. I mean, that is your move, Timur, and you showed it to me. Obviously, we want to play c5 again, not allowing bishop c4, and I will be evil and take the big idea from you, because I already see it, that in same lines, the rook is not going to be on d4, and that will be the spot for the queen to go to d4. That is, I know it's Timur's idea, but I managed to say it before he was on it. Yeah. But it's okay. I give him all the credit.
At the same time, black does retain the idea of c5 and c4, and the fact that the bishop is here. Obviously, you could try to do a combination of those, but it's going to be either one of c5, c4, or the possibility of queen d4, which reveals itself after rook e5.
Right, bishop f5, opening the d file, and that's very, very unpleasant for white already.
So here, bishop f5 here, and you see if bishop captures. Bishop f5 obviously attacks the bishop on d3, and here white gets into trouble right here.
Exactly. The important idea was that, let me just go back a second, that queen d4 is not winning on the spot because of queen to b2. Or even, I would consider maybe such an idea. I mean, it looks very dangerous, but there is really no check to continue in this position. But opening the d file with the idea of bishop f5 is just super powerful. And here the problem is that rook he1, this is just checkmate. I have queen a1, let me just show it. And if queen b2, okay, I think this is the coolest checkmate, right? So this rook d6 is a super move, I think. I'm not saying better, but it's just such a powerful idea. And if
so let's examine kind of the most active move for h. For rook e5 was sort of a preventive measure, but it didn't work. So here black successfully goes for c5, h5, and c4 right here. B takes c. Once again, this variation may be a bit complicated. You don't have to remember the exact moves because none of your opponents are genius enough to reach this situation, So this is really something for you to
just
expand your mind and pick up a new idea. So here, okay, black goes for c4, b takes c, queen comes to d4, obviously going for the attacking opportunities. Here, this h4, h5 idea served white to be able to open up the black's king a little bit. And here, white is definitely creating some counterplay with the c5. Rook d5, very interesting, sacrificing the bishop on e6, but white doesn't take the bishop.
Queen a1, just grab the rook on h1 for example.
Yeah, exactly. So if rook takes, then we're going to go ahead and continue queen a1. So bishop on e6 is not really hanging then. So white continues queen b3, just solidifies the position. And after queen f4, kind of a cool tricky move, king goes to b1, and the bishop on e6 is hanging terribly. So here black obviously has the idea of rook b8, pinning the queen, but this is not the end of the world for white. White is actually getting a very good chances here.
And here, amazing, I like this idea so much. Important to emphasize this. If black is going to play just simple move, well, maybe rook takes c5 is possible to consider, but I really feel that black king is somewhat weaker and white pieces can combine to... I mean, I don't think that white is at all in any danger here. Therefore, it just makes a lot of sense.
This could really get ugly for black. So
right
here, the idea for a really good player, the idea is
quite obvious.
Is obvious. Yeah, you may take a few minutes and really figure out, stop the video, and really just kind of measure up the chances for either side under the current circumstances and see how black can improve that situation. So here, rook takes d3 is necessary to weaken the king and create those perpetual and counter-attacking chances. So
just an excellent line.
We figure this position is definitely going to be playable and definitely going to serve black to find the perpetual in this position.
Let's just show one last line to conclude this long variation, which is c5 immediately, and now instead of queen a6, bishop to c4, we will just give examples of two absolutely top players. Rook to d2, capture, and here in the game, rook d1 was played, whereafter capture, c4, and the queen goes to g1 once again and again and again. That queen g1 playing against the pawns on the king side, saving black. This was in Wróblewski against Gashimov, 2009, and the game was a draw. Yet we somewhat believe that maybe after g3, white has some defense. Black actually is somewhat worse. This is maybe the main reason why Timur came up, or was working hard, and came up with maybe this very important novelty, rook 5 to d6, because we weren't so satisfied with the other lines.
Or rather maybe a rook d4, if you guys are more, if you prefer the rook d4 move, I would definitely suggest this move as well. So either one of the rook retreats is fine. c5, bishop c4 I don't like. Black looks active, but this position may not be fully equal.
So again, same main position, and well, this is our second main line. Knight takes c3 and bishop h6 was a line we looked at extensively, and here we are going to look followed with bishop h6. The other one, which maybe these days, 2012, maybe even a more main one, is bishop takes d4 and queen to b6. The idea actually is not that far away. How many times in the previous lines we have seen exchanging on c3, exchanging on e3, and then queen b6? That is the beginning. Let me just show this again.
The thing with the queen on b6, it's kind of untouchable, because once white takes that queen, there's no problems,
Exactly. This is exactly what is the other main line. And for example, take it.
It's rather an attacking move.
Right. This is Bakrog Rishuk, and take on b6, and black is immediately equalish. So here we have, I would say, the same version, but I believe that actually this one might be tiny bit with more attempts for black to win the game.
Definitely agree with that.
Not just to make a draw. I mean, we are keeping the knights on the board, and it's being played by many super strong players. We can mention another move which we are not going to analyze very deeply, and it is queen c7. It seems that this move is a bit less popular these days. For example, one game that I can show, I mean, it is not bad for black, but if a move like h4 is being played, okay, maybe black has to choose bishop f5, but if he's playing e5, white queen to c5, and now queen b6 is strongly met with this move knight to a4. The endgame is somewhat in white's favor.
I must show this bishop f5 because this idea kind of fascinated me. In our analysis with Ronin, here white continues h5. If white prefers to play g4, which is considered a better move, bishop e6. And now this is favorable for black to introduce this exchange. With a pawn on g2, maybe black is slightly worse, but here, because g3, f4 in the endgame is going to be looking good for white, but here, black is feeling comfortable, improving the king, taking charge of the d file, and creating some counterplay. So here, white would continue h5, and here rook fd8, activating the rook. And what's interesting, bishop takes here, and this is really a cool position for black, considering how many opportunities there are. Knight c3, and possibly even exchanging the queens.
Queen
Worst
E5.
case scenario, exchange queens, but really, it's about the attacking opportunities for black. So here, you guys are welcome. You guys are welcome to explore the possibilities of queen c7, but we're gonna go on with the most principal lines of queen b6.
Right. I mean, I'll just say we have some reasonable players. I mean, okay, strong one, Georgiev. We mentioned him before. This is a game he played against Morozevich in 2000. We mentioned him in the early 90s, and we have Buzhangji, all Fedorov. That, I mean, at some point was considered a strong player. Buzhangji and Georgiev around 2700. But all in all, the impression is that Queen c7 is a secondary move to Queen b6, and we obviously cannot absolutely look at everything here. So after Queen b6, the most principal move is Knight a4, but not the only move to consider. Bishop c4 is an interesting approach, actually a very interesting one. The idea is that after exchanges of the queens, I mean, obviously this should be the main move to consider, and exchanging. Well, white has those double pawns, but he controls the d file and still wants, or having some aims on the queen side. Overall, it's probably not that much. After
the million move game between Ivанчук and Carlsen, they just kept moving those. The position, it's interesting. The position reaches its limits after white really improves, because there's nothing black can do against the idea of rook c5, then the pawn improves, But black finds comfort in this rook c7, improving the king, then the f4. But really, this is the full dragon endgame, and you guys are welcome to examine the game between Carlsen and Ivанчук, where
Ivанчук-Carlsen from 2009.
Where Ivанчук did succeed in the end.
Right, but the position overall was around equalish. Another line that we can quickly mention is knight to e3.
Actually, knight e3 seemed a little more logical to me. You making that fork right there.
But here, after queen h4, let's see the most recent game. Actually played very, very recently, I would say.
As I was examining this situation, I kind of got to appreciate this idea for white to give up that white square bishop, put all the pawns on white squares, and have this knight and queen
fight for the dark squares.
Fight for the dark squares and get really tight control over those.
But here we see how black should approach here. If defending e7, playing so passively, is immediately doomed, just immediately wrong plan. But we have seen this again and again, and okay, we already feel some possible sacrifices if they will be allowed on b3. This was Dominguez against Robson in the Spice Cup tournament from 2011, a very recent one. Dominguez won the game, but it's clearly with compensation for black,
or at least counterplay. So
right. What else we have? So this is bishop c4, very cool idea. And knight take d5, just take. And okay, we can examine several possibilities if white is going to take the pawn. Okay, first of all, obviously this is not going to be anything. The a2 pawn is hanging. So really taking straightforward on d5, bishop e6. And now, if queen to b5, we have already seen those ideas again and again. Of course, not exchanging the queens. And the b file, the c file.
It's going to be insane initiative for black.
Yes.
For that pawn.
Xu Jun against Lalich, grandmasters from Hastings, 96. The game ended in a draw, but clearly enough compensation for black. Queen d4, very much with the same idea, only the queen may be a bit more centralized, but in this situation, black queen goes to a5, not to c7. Okay, we can consider here two moves, just to give you an example. a3, the rook coming to d8, queen to b4, queen to g5, and alright, it's absolutely clear that black is just dominating this position. I mean, if f4, just take on d1 and rook d8, where are white pieces? h1, f1, rook d2. This is how the game continued, and
how the game ended?
Yeah, Black won quite quickly. I mean, White is just losing
exactly.
a lot of material here.
Just really, this illustrates what
Open files.
Open files, the combination of this wild counterplay and the typical dragon initiative.
Yes, this was Ilya Gurevich against Ian Rogers, two respectable grandmasters from London 1992. So instead of a3, bishop c4, okay, a developing move, makes some sense, but also here. And again, the pawns on the king side. And Black is just already better, I think. His pawns are more dangerous.
Once the pawns are captured.
Right. Brumberger against Bu Zhangji from 2007, and Black went on to win this game. So really we see that knight a4, which is the main move on move 16, I would say knight a4 or bishop c4 are the possibilities. Anything else is take on d5. I do not believe much.
Yeah, so here knight a4 is really in the spirit of long castle, 9-move long castle.
Right.
It's really going after the positional,
especially the square
control. Exactly.
Especially the square. So obviously, if Black exchange queens, all right. I mean, let's just show it. Then it's no brainer. White is just better here. I mean, it's just simple. Knight goes to c5. The bishop will develop. The pawn on c6 is weak. It will be slow, but absolutely clear that it is Black suffering in this position.
Just better king opportunities, better control over the center. So it's just going to be really building up. Black is going to be losing important squares for the knight. The Black's bishop is going to be restricted. So this endgame is not something you guys want to get into voluntarily.
Right. So after knight a4, we have two main moves here. Queen c7 or queen a5. And we have one of the first game here is, again, a very recent game by Gavin Jones that, as we do this video, he's doing amazingly well in the European Championship. So you can have an idea where this video was recorded, all the updated games, and actually he won a great game with this line. Queen a5 and b3. Okay, so bishop e6 is a very logical move. There are some other moves, queen c7 right now, so basically is Black real achievement provoking b3? Alright, it's an idea, we will touch those lines a bit, but queen c7 is going to be our main focus. Do you agree with that, Timo?
Yeah, so let's kind of clarify for you guys right here. So queen goes to b6. We did mention the possibility of queen c7. You guys are welcome to come back and review the idea of queen c7 here. So all those queen moves, right? But here, queen b6, knight a4, and here we got the queen c7, which we're going to emphasize, and queen a5 idea, where white almost automatically plays b3. So now there's the idea of queen c7. So we pretty much reached the position that we're going to be reviewing later very closely, but with the move b3 on board. Whether that's beneficial for white or not really depends on what Black has in mind. So here, let's move on. And
let's just see Adams again, Gavin Jones, since we're going to mention him in an extremely recent game played just days before we did it. So let's see bishop e6. And just this game against Adams. And Adams played bishop c4, rook to d8, queen to c5. Of course, forget about exchanges. And knight f4 with reasonably equal
right here,
position.
The knight right here from a4 is defending the square on c3, obviously. So knight f4 is the reasonable option. And here, Black reaches
just okay position.
At least an even game. Well, not at least, but really close to an even game. So
we can mention just very briefly some other ideas after bishop e6. For example, the move g3, again rook f8, again not exchanging. By now, like Timur said before, those ideas should be in your head. Okay, bishop out, rook there, queen c5 not exchanging the queens, this is automatic. Knight b6 going after the knight, and a5. Okay, black is already ahead. a4, he might be faster, so white played this move. Of course, white has reasonable compensation. Black played very, very well and managed to win this. Sujurov against Timofeyev, 2011. Very, very strong players, and was very interesting game.
Definitely, to be honest, this position I picked for white any day. It looks very promising. So,
but in reality, Timofeyev played just best moves, and white was maybe at best tiny better, but really
from
around
a practical
equal.
perspective,
Yes,
definitely this is really a matter of
taste.
Of taste, But really, to be honest, most players who like to push the edge, kind of the dragon style would be favoring white, even though the computer would take black. Here, one thing I wanted to kind of emphasize, just for the sake of chess, g3 is a really cool move that white just played a move ago. G3 right here, very cool and proactive idea where, as you can see, later on it becomes key for white to prevent the ideas with knight f4, a queen f4 possibilities, and as we can see, also helps white develop the initiative.
Yes.
So those really smart moves is what separates the really good players from the brilliant ones.
So queen c7 and queen a5, we going to have in our games collection some more games with this one, but again, we really would like to touch all those tiny lines, but then this video will be 5 to 10 hours, and it's just going to be a bit too long.
So we're just going to move on with the queen c7. Once again, to make it clear for you guys, queen goes to b6, knight goes to a4. We definitely want to have that knight on a4. Meanwhile, to create the counterplay, queen c7, create the counterplay in the center. Bishop goes to c4, but white is really holding a tight grasp on the king side play, restricting black's opportunities.
And here there are two main moves, rook d8 and rook b8. How logical to put the rooks on the open file. And the game we mentioned, an extremely recent one, is rook to b8, played in the European Championship. But just 2 months ago, we have the two best American players playing one against the other, Kamsky against Nakamura. You cannot get anything more quality in American chess. They actually played this in 𝐕𝐚𝐫𝐢𝐚 2012.
Very cool idea. To be honest, when I was analyzing, I like the rook b8 better than rook d8. Just really in the spirit of the position, because rook on d8, even though it does look attacking, it does look like it may pose some threats to the d4 queen. It really becomes a target rather for some of the ideas with c4, say. So here, rook b8, just kind of like visually, I'm describing really the visual assessment. Rook b8 just kind of serves that purpose of creating counterplay. And bishop d5 is never really a possibility, because c takes d and black is just going to be...
The b, c file, we've been in this show.
The counterplay is just going to be overwhelming. So here, white obviously just plays on positionally.
Let's go back just a move and see g3 that you like so much. I mean, that actually was Savchenko idea, played this week. I mean,
exactly.
Okay, or actually, somewhere in the middle of last week or the weekend. I mean, just days ago, and really strong grandmasters. And knight b6. We both agree on one thing, that if black either exchanges the knights or the bishops, is most likely going to be easily okay in that position. Just tiny bit reduce the material on this side. For example, now black can either take with the pawn or maybe with the queen. Maybe I'll take with the pawn, my feeling.
Yes, knight b6, a takes b, and just a good endgame.
b5, c5, yes,
and
the pawns are
attacking
rolling.
ideas. Because white is not even close to be creating the threats on the the king side. Okay, it's h4, h5, but black
b5, c5.
Black's ideas
immediately
are more real. Yes, exactly.
right. So of course white didn't take, but here exactly our feeling: capture, and c5, and black is already with rook b4 ideas, a5, c4. Very, very fast game for black. Savchenko against 𝐤𝐤-Jones from European Championship 2012, and 𝐤𝐤-Jones won the game in actually great style.
So here we're gonna go ahead and examine the main idea that happened between Kamsky and Nakamura, rook e1, and black plays rook b4, very cool attacking move. b3, solidifying, and Nakamura didn't hesitate to get one of those juicy kingside pawns. That really is like one of the key ideas here, despite being so unromantic. You do pick up the pawn on h2.
Well, we're going to see next game that black just picked one after the other, romantic or no romantic. He just won the game on the spot.
It definitely does the job. Here, kind of for a second, I'm guessing rook a4 may be a possibility. However, here, once again, this pragmatic approach of grabbing pawns creates the idea of a5 for white. Maybe that's why black hesitated to continue on with in the spirit of the sacrifices. Rook b7, now it goes to c5, really pick the defensive line and exchange the queens quickly, and decided to solidify and basically play this endgame for, I wouldn't say for a draw, but really to try to hold in the situation. Seems like white may have enough initiative to claim compensation.
Exactly. When I first looked at that line, I was and I remember actually looking at this game, 𝐕𝐴 I thought, oh wow, black is just better here, and we sometimes look at similar positions with white having that pawn. Yet it's not easy. The game first of all ended in a draw, and even the computer believes that white almost always is just in the game. 1/10 of a point, 2/10 of a point each side, which means that our idea of getting, or white's idea, getting to those endgame with the extra pawn on h2 means for black is going to be in trouble if he allows something like that. Without the pawn, it's about reasonable. With the pawn, it's just horrible. So grabbing the pawn and getting to this position is possible. Let's see the next game where black not just grab one pawn, but just grab all of them. So if white plays h4 after rook to d8, I know you like this line.
Yeah, allows for the square, for the queen to come in. First, black develops the bishop to an attacking spot. Bishop b3, nice prophylaxis. Here, against h5, I imagine black would be ready to consider the idea of queen f4, exchanging the queens. Not sure if black would want to get creative here and try to jump in with the knight to g2, or maybe just to retreat back to d5. Seems like both are possibilities. So the endgame
and also some tactics I think has to be considered. This is from positional point of view correct, but what about this move right away? Because we have knight b4, and if take on g6, okay, it's really super scary, but another time, this idea that we mentioned, the bishop is a great defender, and I think white is just pretty much toast here.
Very cool. Yes, exactly. This is something that gotta keep you guys sharp, looking for the tactical opportunities right here. Bishop c2 happened. I think similar idea in Smith versus Nagy, continued in a positional key, something along the lines of rook e1 in a similar position. However, here definitely bishop c2, and obviously king takes c2, knight b4. So cool for black. Now let's return to this situation where after bishop f5, white continues to do the prophylaxis bishop b3, and queen jumps to g3. So this is the time for this festival of pawn grabbing.
Yeah.
First black solidifies, just prevents that counterplay, and now those g2 and f3 and the h4 pawn are all vulnerable to black's attack. So
I have to tell you, I mean, sitting next to Timo here is something like all he wants is just to grab all those pawns one after the other, and you'd smile. This was played. Heine Peter Nielsen with the black pieces play this against the 2400 player. It was in Denmark and just won the game. Actually, it was quite a recent game. The interesting part is that exactly a month after this game, Peter Nielsen played the same against, okay, not a 24 and a bit, but against Mickey Adams, 27 and a bit, and had very much the same type of position. If in the game that we have seen, after h4, bishop f5 was played, so Adams played bishop b3, and here two moves are possible for black. Either bishop goes to f5, or bishop goes to e6. Bishop f5 was played before, but let's see a recent game, bishop e6. Interesting developments here. Knight c5, it looks like this is really bad, but here black has this resource of knight to f4. The queen is under attack, okay. White capture on e6, attacking black's queen, and capture back. And here again, tiny bit reducing the material.
White doesn't have the time to spoil that structure right there with the bishop e6. For a second, it looks like white is going to do something terrible, to black structure, but the black really escapes, and after this, adjusts the knight once again.
Yes, the knight goes again to d5. We believe that with one minor piece on the board, black is okay. We say it again, and this game is nothing but
c5
example.
May be the square for the queen, especially in this situation, threatening to win that knight after bishop d5. However, this one, queen b6, I imagine, and black is just doing fine.
Or even e6, I think might be reasonable.
Yeah, e6 continued with queen b6, or with the idea of queen b6 later on. So here queen g5, exploring the attacking possibilities as well. So rook goes to d4 with the ideas of rook h4. The computer is considering c5 idea, however, in this game, black played a more solid line, rook d7, and solidify, centralize the rooks.
Yeah, I think they agreed to a draw at this moment, if I'm not mistaken, but the knight on d5 is so strong, and in order to push it, white has to play c4, but then he's going to weaken the dark squares, horribly weaken them, and kill also the bishop on b3, so Adams took the draw.
Do you think black would consider attacking possibilities here, or just defend, or rather play more
solid,
or you would say passively? What would be black's strategy in this situation?
Well, I think it depends, first of all, on white, what white want to do, but the way I see it, I think black, it's not easy, and it's a matter of, how would I say it, it's a matter of style, but the way I see it, if I'm looking at this position, I would first look, okay, so what are the difficulties for black? And I don't see many. He's very solid, his knight is great, the rook's on this d-file, so I would say simple approach here looks reasonable. On the other hand, if black wants some ambitions, okay, maybe pushing the c pawn, a5. I actually leaning towards more simple play, but again, it's a matter of style.
Figure out the positional complexities, and then go on to explore the counter-attacking possibilities.
So we have bishop f5, if not bishop e6. And there are two pawns with the g pawn. We have g3 or g4. Let's start with g3. Rook to d6.
So this is the position, that essential move that we saw in this line, and then we saw in a couple examples before, that f4 square, where the queen really wants to jump.
And just defending h2.
It's maybe not really wants to jump right at this point, but having that possibility adds, and plus the h2 pawn is hanging.
So the h2 pawn, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
because
it really
here,
covers up the couple squares.
Here we have rook he1. Nakamura grabbed this pawn, and apparently it's a juicy pawn.
Rook d6 is this cool move that kind of just gets to hold the c6, d5 together, and then
double the rooks.
Yeah, exactly, doubling the rooks.
Yeah, and it just doesn't want to do it to d7, allowing knight c5 in one tempi. And here, indeed Grichuk won this game, but okay, we can see he doesn't really have that much. They repeated the position a bit, and
Yeah, he won later on after, imagine, 30, 40 moves. In the game.
yeah, this was played in 2010. I mean, we are not certain exactly if it was maybe what was exactly the situation and why they repeated some moves, but okay, it's also
Here I definitely see black fighting
Okay.
an even game here.
right. I mean, this is Grichuk Motilev. I mean, 2750, 2700, strong players. But we even have stronger players playing this line. So instead of G3, this move G4. Knight F4, again the square, and bishop goes to E6. Before we have seen in Adams against Peter Nielsen, knight goes to E6, or actually
Sure,
bishop
when-
E6 and then the knight went to E6. Now, other version.
In this situation, it seems like after playing G4, White wants to balance the situation, kind of playing a solid move, Queen E3 rather than Queen C5. Do you think anything tactical would happen here, connected with Knight E2, or is it just that Black would save the attacking possibilities after Bishop E6?
Yeah.
Or
I don't see any tactics with knight E2, but it just seems that maybe the knight now has to go back to C3, and the way I see it, the queen on E3 is just looking at all over the board. It's looking to H6. Now let me just put it. Is the queen here, looking here, just like somewhere like in the middle of the field, passing the ball everywhere.
yes, exactly. So Queen C5 is a bit out of balance right there. But you know what? To be honest, we're showing all of this top world champions games right here. However, you know what? In our viewers' experience, a position along the lines of this, with some creative possibilities for both sides.
It's just playable.
Yeah, and then knowing this cool maneuver of Queen B6, let's say the queen threatening to come in, could really, knowing the ideas in the situation, or like Rook D6 that happened a few times, and preparing for Rook D8, could really help you guys seize the initiative and play for the win with a lot of confidence.
Against many even higher rated players, just because you are confident. Right. So that is correct, because when Timo mentioned world champions and I mentioned, okay, we're going to have players stronger than Grichuk Motilev, yeah, we see Ivanchuk against Carlsen. Okay, if Anand is looking at this game, it's probably critical for him, but I mean, for most other players, it's some people up there in the Olympus. So for most players, those Ivanchuk Carlsen are just up there in the Olympus. So bishop E6, H4, take, and again, knight G2 somehow bothering the pawns, exchange. The queen goes to F4,
and more exchanges.
No doubt. And actually, White can and should be tiny bit careful in some situations, because Black King is closer to the pawns, and if Black will create somehow a pass H pawn with a knight endgame, that can be very nasty. Well, this was a draw. I mean, okay, they played I think 29 more moves, but Black is very cool. It is from the same, we've shown Ivanchuk Carlsen, it's the same match they played in Lyon in 2009. And we can reasonably understand why this line, bishop takes d4 and queen b6, and the other line, knight takes c3, why those lines are so popular today. They offer Black positional play,
Those fighting chances,
exactly,
really
without giving that much.
Feels like when Black gets in touch with those ideas, with the cool ideas of creating counterplay, always finds in the end finds comfortable position, regardless how the games end up, in whose favor the games end up. Really, if Black connects with one of those ideas, of activating the knight, of getting some of those black squares, of getting that pawn on H2, getting the pieces active, getting the dragon bishop, in this situation, obviously, we got the cool endgame here. So whenever Black gets comfortable position, comfortable area, for example, Gavin Jones, I believe, showed it in a great way in the game against Savchenko. After G3, he played knight B6, exchanged the knight C5, and you could just see that he played just
slowly, simply. The game was just flowing, and he won with black in pretty incredible style. And I'm not putting Carlsen. Again, he's obviously a strong grandmaster, but not Carlsen. With this line, we are actually concluding this DVD, and we will have another one just to follow, which is going to be our repertoire, mine and Timur, of how to address 9 bishop c4, the main dragon, and we believe that we have some interesting ideas to show you there. But we hope that you enjoy and study and can take many of those ideas into a great use for your chess. This position with bishop c4 is going to be our next DVD. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys for watching our series, and looking forward to see you soon.